Let's make some eyeballs. So I've defined my eyebrows just a little bit, but right now I want to pull that out just a little bit more so there's a little bit more bone and also muscle over the um, the brow. I don't want a ton. I just want to make it so that it's not sloping back and rounded over. The front of the face has a little bit of a flatness to it. If you get too pulled back, it starts to look like you're kind of like a weird racy bird person. Um, and if you get too flat, then it turns into a whole other like weird flattened out version of a head. I don't know. But you can see that it's just a little bit elevated and it gives a tiny shadow to it. And so the little coil that I make to put on there, it's basically tapered so that it's thick on one side and thinner on the other side. And then I can just kind of smooth that in. Now I could turn that into hair, but it is like a little bit of a muscle structure that actually exists on top of your skull that controls your eyebrows. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm putting there, along with a little bit more bone structure to the outer part of the eye. And I also want to make sure that that's as even as possible too. So I'm constantly checking to make sure that both sides of my pieces are even. The other thing is that eyeballs are not like this weird round like socket, at least not what you can personally see. So I'm going to check it again. I'm always checking from a couple of different angles. You want to pick up your piece frequently. If you're not picking it up frequently, then you are not going to be able to see the sort of like weird distortions that are happening by you just leaving it directly on the table. I'm going to smooth out those edges as much as possible, but that's looking like fairly even. Okay, so let's talk about like the eyeballs. So I'm going to get a little ball of clay, and it's a good idea to make both of your balls at the same time so that way that you can tell like what they're doing. So maybe that size? No, that's like way too big. Let's try half that size. All right, that's looking a little bit more better. Maybe about the size, the end of your pinky there. End of my pinky, at least for a head this big, so, you know. And these balls should go pretty much right over the edge of your mouth. And when I put them in there, I'm going to kind of flatten them out and kind of round them. I'm also going to check to make sure that they're about the like same size. So it's right there and over here, like, so you can see how that line is following down to the edges of your mouth, okay? That is where your eyeballs go. The other fun fact is that your eyeballs are exactly one eyeball apart. So once we get this done, we can kind of check and see. But you can see, okay, so I'm putting the eyeball on and I want to round this over. I don't want to flatten it out. I want to make sure that I keep that roundness over the top. Your eyeballs are round, they are not flat. I'm going to check those cheekbones, make sure they're not too off center. Check and see how center I am on that. Like one cheekbone, this side just seems a little bit high, so I'm pushing that down, that right side. And I want to try to push my left side up. And it's not important that you have perfect symmetry, but it definitely helps. And I think it's also really helpful to look at your face from multiple different angles. If you are stagnant, then you will not be able to see what's going on. And those little cracks and stuff that are showing up on the side, not a big deal. Don't worry about it. We're going to put an ear on it. We're going to scratch the heck out of that little area. Okay, I'm checking to make sure my eyeballs are the same distance forward. Oh my gosh, I've made some weird heads where like one eyeball is like an inch further out than the other eyeball. It looks funky. All right, so we're gonna do the lower eyelid first. So I'm gonna get a little tiny piece of clay and I'm going to make a little coil. Very tiny, tiny coil. And I wanna make it kind of as pretty as I can. Taper the edges for sure. And then I'm just going to put that right along the base of the eye, like a bag underneath the eye, okay? And I'm going to smooth just the bottom edge of that out. Don't smooth out the inside edge. you'll muck up your eyelid. Your eyelid has thickness, okay? So we want to make sure that we put it on there. Most of the time I see people draw the eyeballs, or like draw an eyelid around it, and that oddly enough also creates a recess, and it's not what your eyeball's doing. Okay, so I want you to be really careful about if you're drawing something on here, you're doing it wrong, okay? What we're doing is we are sculpting with light. And again, that little pointed tool, it's a number 6 clay shaper or color shaper, um, is really helpful to have. But you can use the wooden knife if you need to. It'll work. It's just, oh my gosh, having tools that are like the right shape already without having to try to manipulate it is fabulous. Okay, so I'm just going to smooth this out, and I'm paying really close attention to the line that I'm creating underneath. So depending on what, like if I did that line straight across, it would almost look like I was like squinting, or maybe even smiling if I had actually made a smiling face. But if I like make a line going straight across, especially without a smile that's attached to it, it's just going to look a little bit funky. Okay, so now we're going to do the upper eyelid. So upper eyelid is going to be, oh, I'm sorry. Um, let's let's do both sides at the same time, okay, guys? That'll be a lot easier. That way I can try to match things as much as possible and keep things symmetric, so that our lives will go well. I'll smooth all of that out. I think the hard part is when you do the first one, like, okay, your first one looks good. Now the hard part is trying to match the first one. And so pay really close attention to what you did on the other side. Try to keep in line with that. And also I'm noticing that my cheekbone here just seems a little bit low. So I'm going to add a little bit more clay. And I want to bring that up. And I kind of mucked up my edge on the inside, which means I'm going to have to be so careful when I go in there to fix that. I'm going to try to not get rid of that natural line that's in there. Which honestly, if you can not muck up that line, your life is going to be so much better. That cheekbone's still a little bit high. It's not like super noticeable, so I'm not like, and this isn't, I'm not trying to create like I'm trying to make a generic head. And if things aren't perfect, I am not going to freak out. I'm going to go for the best that I can. We're going to see how it goes. Okay, now we can add that upper eyelid. So the upper eyelid is going to, again, be something going really thin to much thicker over on the side. I'll make it longer than what I need. I'm going to make sure that eyeball actually goes across that whole surface. And again, I'm looking to the interior to make sure that it looks like that sort of like, I'm going to say almondy shape or football-y shape, but you got to be really careful. You don't want those things to like pop out of the eyes. It should be a ball that looks like it's covered by 2 sections of flesh, okay? And so take a good look at your eyeballs and like what shape your eyelids make around your eyeball, okay? And I'm working on that edge is super important. Again, go stare at yourself in the mirror while you're doing this. It can be really, really helpful. I know we all think we know what things look like. And I'll have to tell you guys, I've been making this same head for a while. So it's like I kind of like got it down now. So I don't necessarily need to look at reference, but I do look at reference every once in a while, even with this, even with like kind of generic head, just so I can be like, oh yeah, because I'm constantly learning. Actually, like I think this was the first time that I did my lower eyelid first. I always like to do the upper eyelid first, but oh my gosh, the lower eyelid first is making it so much easier because I can just go in there. And now I'm using the chisel tip right now. It's like a half chisel, and this is actually really helpful for this sort of line. If you don't have this that is okay. You didn't have to get it. My level 2 people who are going to have to make a full scale head hopefully got these tools. But if you don't have them, you can do this. Your most helpful tool by far is going to be your wooden knife and your plastic rib. So I want to smooth that in, and I actually want to go in a little bit right around the eyeball. So when I'm looking at the front profile, like that cheekbone, I want it to pop out just the tiniest bit, so that I have a little bit more bone structure and a little more like, I don't know, whatever. Because the widest part of your face is typically that high cheekbone just below your eyelid, in between your eyeball and your ear. So I want that part to stick out the most. So right now, I didn't do a lot in terms of connecting this eyelid to the top. I just barely like kind of edged it into the top there. And now I'm going to spend all of my time just trying to like smooth that out and make sure both edges actually have a good looking connection. So I'm looking for like that little like pit / tear duct right in on the center point. I'll get rid of some crumbs, and I want to leave that thickness up on the top because that starts to give it an illusion of, well, my eyelid isn't that thick. It does start to give an illusion of kind of like eyelashes just by having that darker element there. I want to make sure that that crease is really nice. And everybody's creases is totally different. Like that is a totally individual thing. So this is like what my generic, like when I make a crease, like that's what the crease looks like. You can make your creases look however you want. Some people don't have folds over their eyelids, which makes for some awesome makeup. And then other people actually have like caves above their eyelid. My aunt has that, and I'm always fascinated. Like I love it. I love. I don't know why. It's beautiful. So again, I'm going to do the other side, and I'm going to try to match it with the same size, going narrow to thick. I want to make sure that that little corner goes really nicely into that tear duct and that it's lining up with the other eyelid. So now I'm looking for symmetry across those two. And notice I'm using that cup chisel tip thing again because it works out fabulous. And I'm just kind of pressing that eyelid down to make it so that I have the shape that I want. And make sure that that edge kind of comes around, and that my connection is nice and clean. So that one I want, like, I want to smooth out that connection because that's a fold, whereas the other one's actually a change of different surfaces. So you can see how I'm using that chisel tip, that I'm kind of like dragging the clay up and shaping it that way. And I can also use it as a 90-degree angle, which is very helpful. So I'm going to use my little cup tool here, and that's actually really helpful for creating little round things, but I'm also using the outside edge of it to help shape things. Now, if I were doing this with my wooden knife, I'd be using pretty much the rounded end the majority of the time until I needed to use the corner to like get into the smaller spaces. Just making sure that my brows are kind of like lining up with each other. And I go back and recheck the shape of my head because it kind of like fluctuates and moves around over time, like how I'm holding it and that sort of stuff. So it is really helpful if you just like check all of your angles, move it around, don't get stuck on one thing. Okay, so let's switch back over to that chisel tip, and then I can make that little fold for the upper eyelid going into the lower eyelid and have that come out to the side. I was doing such a good job not going off screen, but you know, sometimes you just gotta go off screen. Okay, and then I'm going to pull the corner of my eyelids down. Let's make sure that bottom, I'm using the cup tool again to just pop my eyeball down a little bit more to make it so that it's a little bit more rounded, not quite as flat. Work on smoothing that little side out a little bit. Get my eyelashes going. Just a little soft flick up can totally change the shadow that you're getting from that. I can't tell if I like the light for sculpting here or not, because it creates some really nice shadows, but because I stay in that same spot, like my light, I tend to like sculpt over to the side a little bit, which isn't super helpful. My face got a little bit long, so I'm going to squish it down a little bit. And the nose is a constant thing that I'm just kind of like working on. So I can pop back and forth in between all of those. Okay, I feel good about eyeballs. That's looking good.